So just check to make sure you can hear us.
Yes. Natalie, can you hear us?
Yes, very well. Thank you very much. Well, I'm so sorry not to be here with you. Well,
Let me introduce you first, Natalie, just so everyone knows who you are.
Sorry, what do you want?
I'll introduce you to everyone first, just so everyone knows who you are.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. So welcome everyone online and here to our next keynote speaker, who is Professor Natalie Depraz, the professor in contemporary philosophy and phenomenology at the Rouen University of Rouen, Normandy, and the university member at the Husserl Archives in the École Normale. And there's again a huge publication list, and as has been my wont or a habit, I haven't been trying to list all of them, but some important publications that are worth mentioning: 1995 book on intersubjectivity of self-alterity and Husserl, co-authored book with Francesca Varela and Pierre Vermersch in 2003 on becoming aware of pragmatics of experiencing. More recently, a 2014 book on attention and vigilance at the crossroads of phenomenology and cognitive sciences, and a book on surprise. Hopefully I pronounce this properly, La Surprise du Sujet, with Zeta Books 2018. And I believe about to publish another very significant book on surprise. Is it Surprise, A History of Philosophy?
Yes.
With Sherman and Paris. And so with that, we'll hand the floor over to you, Natalie.
Okay, thank you very much. And again, sorry for not being there with you in flesh and blood as I planned to, but well, I had some personal issues to deal with. So I'm still happy to be here and even online, and I will go ahead immediately so that we can have more time to discuss after my talk. I also didn't have time to prepare a PowerPoint, so I hope I will talk slowly so that you can understand, or well, even my English accent. So my talk is, the title of my talk is Phenomenology and Mindfulness Awareness. In the article Phenomenology and Mindfulness, published 2021 in the Journal of Consciousness Studies, Odysseus, Stone, and Dan Zahavi make three claims about phenomenology and Buddhism, which are strongly connected. First, phenomenology is a philosophical theoretical discipline uniquely concerned with the mind-world correlation. Second, Buddhist meditative practice is a practice of paying attention defined as mindfulness. And third, the comparison between phenomenology and Buddhism would better be situated on the philosophical level between philosophical phenomenology and Buddhist philosophy, and not on the level of their experiential praxis. All three claims are not false, but their truth remains, to my mind, poor and reductionist, so that they avoid an effective, fruitful confrontation and cooperation between phenomenology and Buddhism. Furthermore, they delineate a narrow, exclusive understanding of phenomenology, of Buddhism, and of their way of relating to each other. So in the following talk, I will show that not only are the authors, to my view, misled in their claims, but they end up containing a reductionist view of phenomenology, of Buddhism, and of their relation. In order to do so, I will contend a more complex understanding of phenomenology as a passive, receptive, co-embodied, and generative-oriented approach, of Buddhism as awareness, vipassana, as self-other equalizing, Lojong Tonglen, and as a practice of impermanence and emptiness, Shunyata, which will allow me to, in turn, to unfold the relation between phenomenology and Buddhism situated on its experiential praxis proper. So first, from the mind-world correlation to the receptive, co-embodied generative phenomenology. And I will quote two small words from the philosopher Paul Ricoeur in French, so you will excuse, I didn't translate them. L'œuvre de Husserl est le type de l'œuvre non résolue, embarrassée, raturée, arborescente, C'est pourquoi bien des chercheurs ont trouvé leur propre voie, parce qu'ils prolongeaient une ligne magistralement amorcée par le fondateur et non moins magistralement biffée par lui. La phénoménologie est pour une bonne part l'histoire des hérésies husserliennes. La structure de l'œuvre du maître impliquait qu'il n'y eut pas d'orthodoxie husserlienne. So the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur makes such a pluralistic claim in this essay entitled Sur la phénoménologie, he published 1953. And he writes further in another article he published 1967, and I quote again, la phénoménologie est un vaste projet qui ne se referme pas sur une œuvre ou un groupe d'œuvres précises. Elle est en effet moins une doctrine qu'une méthode capable d'incarnations multiples. Husserl a abandonné en cours de route autant de voies qu'il en a frayé, si bien que la phénoménologie au sens large est la somme de l'œuvre husserlienne et des hérésies issues de Husserl. C'est aussi la somme des variations de Husserl lui-même, et en particulier la somme des descriptions proprement phénoménologiques et des interprétations philosophiques par lesquelles il réfléchit et systématise sa méthode. End of quote. So I would like to place my contribution today under the aegis of Paul Ricoeur's statement. His open-minded, pluralistic, and inclusive understanding of phenomenology is indeed faithful and genuinely faithful to the philosophical view of the founder of phenomenology, Edmund Husserl. So in short, the mind-world correlation is a limited view, an extremely limited view to define phenomenology. Furthermore, my claim is that it is methodologically questionable to start only with intentionality as the core of phenomenology, and to subsequently add embodied intersubjectivity, passivity as receptivity, and generativity, as if we had to do with a grounding property, intentionality, to which we would join supplements. This is quite a static, hierarchical, authoritarian view of phenomenology. Instead, I suggest a systemic, horizontal, democratic, dynamic circulation between these different dimensions. So first, intentionality. Here is how Stone and Zahavi define phenomenology in their article. The aim of phenomenology is precisely not to investigate either the subject or the object, either the mind or the world, but to investigate both in their interrelation or correlation. And also, they say, phenomenology should not be conceived as a theory about the structure of subjectivity, nor it is merely a theory about how we understand and perceive the world. Rather, its proper theme is the mind-world dyad. So for the authors, phenomenology amounts to the correlation, qua interrelation between subject and object, or mind and world, and what they call, in the second quote, the mind-world dyad. First, it is questionable to identify object and world on the one hand, subject and mind on the other hand. Why? It amounts to fold over each other or even crush on each other object and world, which belong to contrasted understandings of phenomenology, Husserl on the one hand, Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty on the other hand. Besides, while identifying subject and mind, they present a definition of subjectivity deprived of its bodily life and of its intersubjective dynamics, which are precisely the new properties Husserl puts forward against the Cartesian solipsistic bodiless concept of the subject. So Stone and Zahavi's understanding of the subject therefore mean, to my view, a move backward, mapping again Husserl upon Descartes. How is it possible? And finally, the word dyad is also problematic. It suggests a dualistic understanding of intentionality, where in contrast, Husserl sought to think the very unitary dynamics of a consciousness understood as an openness to the other. In short, the very understanding of intentionality provided by the authors as what would be the core of phenomenology not only is poor, limited, that is reductionist, but it does not do justice to the properties Husserl himself puts to the fore as being inherently included in his new understanding of consciousness, that is, an embodied intersubjective openness to the other. But there is more. Stone and Zahavi very curiously decide to favor intentionality and to dismiss the relevance of the very method of phenomenology, that is epoche. This is a curious interpretation, since we know intentionality is considered by Husserl himself as belonging to the level of a descriptive psychology, while epoche opens up the true level of transcendental phenomenology. They argue that, I quote, logical investigations was a resounding success and basically triggered the launch of the phenomenological movement. The work, however, contains no reference to the epoche or the phenomenological reduction, end of quote. And they add, neither Heidegger nor Merleau-Ponty made many references to the epoche or the reduction. As for Sartre, he only mentioned the epoche once in Being and Nothingness, end of quote. True or not, it is quite astonishing to me to seek to prove that epoche is not a necessary methodological component of phenomenology while counting occurrences, as if statistics and quantitative measurements were a reliable assessment for the definition of phenomenology. Are not Stone and Zahavi changing phenomenology in that way into a kind of measurable science? Furthermore, they suggest an extremely limited view of Husserl's phenomenology equated to the logical investigations. Now, even the logical investigations, as Jean-François Lavigne remarkably showed in his masterpiece book, Husserl et la naissance de la phénoménologie. So in the logical investigation, the reduction already operates on psychological facts, even though it does not involve yet a reduction concerning the eidos. However, the eidetic intuition applied to the lived experience is already present. Furthermore, the reduction will appear explicitly only a few years later in his thematic way, 1906, 1907, in the introduction entitled The Idea of Phenomenology, which according to Lavigne indicates that it was actually already implied in 1901. But again, there is more. How about the transcendental phenomenology unfolded from 1913 onwards? How about the genetic and generative phenomenology central to the Husserlian philosophy in the 20s and in the 30s, and where the epoche both as suspension of preconceptions and as a critical radical ethical attitude is crucial? Are they not constitutive operations of phenomenology? Let's move also beyond Husserl himself. Heidegger defines in 1927 in his book Grundprobleme der Phänomenologie, the phenomenological reduction as a turning, I quote, as a turning away from what is from Seinde and allowing oneself to be led back to its being, Sein. Also in What is Metaphysics in 1929, he is even clearer, and I quote, to accomplish this Einsprung, one must first give space to being in its entirety, then abandon oneself in the nothing, that is to free oneself from the idols that each of us possesses. Finally, let go of the oscillations of this state of suspense. And he adds, if the natural attitude is an effort that consciousness makes to escape itself, the epoche is no longer a miracle. It is no longer an intellectual method. It is the anguish which is imposed on us and which we cannot avoid, of quote. Finally, one feature that is here also absent from the definition of phenomenology by Stone and Zahavi is the theory of passivity and the method of genetic constitution, which are masterpieces of Husserl's revolution in his understanding of consciousness as embodied and situated in the world. Truly, it is curious that Stone and Zahavi choose to forget, if I can say, such crucial and outstanding dimensions of phenomenology as a new philosophical method. So that's the first point of my talk. And now I would like to go to the second point, which is dedicated to Buddhist meditation, and which is entitled From Mindfulness to Awareness and Self-Other Equalizing. So in the first part of my presentation, I showed how phenomenology is presented by Stone and Zahavi in quite a narrow approach, reductionist approach. The presentation of Buddhism is in this article still much more problematic. It is reduced to a paying attention experience. It is obvious that no Buddhist practitioner would recognize herself in such a limited view of Buddhism. Again, some will say that it is not false to identify meditation with paying attention, but it is so reductionist that it becomes highly unfair to what Buddhism offers in its 2,500 years multifarious traditions spread out in India, China, Tibet, and Japan, but also now in the Western cultures. So first, mindfulness is nothing without awareness. Stone and Zahavi defined the Buddhist approach as being mindful, and I quote, "Consider the claim that mindfulness amounts to paying attention to what is present in experience. A recurrent problem is that such references to experience often fail to distinguish between the intentional object and the intentional act. Does mindfulness amount to a distinct type of reflective or self-reflective self-presence, or does it rather afford a particular kind of presence of or to the experienced world?" Unquote. Truly, the shamatha meditative practice, nowadays translated with the word mindfulness, refers to a practice of cultivating one's attention to what is happening, mostly referred, besides, to my bodily breathing, in-breath and out-breathing, itself related to the flow of my emerging and vanishing thoughts. When describing even shortly the shamatha practice, you can notice that the authors are not interested in the experiential practice itself, but only in the conceptual distinctions at work. Their questions in the above quotation show it. They want to map the shamatha practice with reflexivity and intentional presence to the object, while shamatha clearly refers to a practice favoring micro-bodily processes at once anchored in breathing and emerging inner moves. So to my view, this approach is violently conceptualizing what is first an experiencing dynamics. In order to prove their goodwill to situate themselves on a concrete level of experience, they refer to Kabat-Zinn's mindfulness-based stress reduction meditational approach. I quote, "John Kabat-Zinn's famous MBSR exercise, in which subjects are instructed to mindfully eat a resin, carefully attending to its color, texture, and flavor as one brings it to one's lips and chews, is arguably a case in point in favor of the presence of the experienced world." So even though the above description is clearly a fine phenomenological description of what is going on as far as some acts of consciousness are concerned when achieving the daily act of eating a resin, it does not take into account the full span of Kabat-Zinn's himself, concern with mindful meditation. Indeed, the latter defined himself mindful meditation as, I quote, "the awareness that arises from paying attention on purpose in the present moment and non-judgmentally." End of quote. By focusing on the breath, the idea is to cultivate attention on the body and mind as it is moment to moment, and so help with pain, both physical and emotional. Now, Stone and Zahavi don't take into account the breathing bodily emotional experience, which is crucial in meditation. In the resin exercise, indeed, It is not meant to analyze, one is not meant to analyze the raison quoi object. One is offered first a theme for training in attention, and second, an introduction into the realm of full experience, where sensory, emotional, cognitive components are all to be carefully attended to. Furthermore, as it is clearly noted by Kabat-Zinn, shamatha, mindfulness, is nothing without vipassana, awareness. Or again, the focused attention on breathing and thoughts, mindfulness, is nothing without the panoramic open attention at work in awareness, vipassana. Kabat-Zinn explicitly unites both, and it is obvious that Stone and Zahavi are maybe not aware of such an interdependent link between mindfulness and awareness. Besides, it is not for nothing that we talk in meditation about the shamatha vipassana practice. Mindfulness straightaway includes in itself a panoramic kind of attention, in which the very distinction between the act and the object, between self-presence and presence in the world, fades away and becomes irrelevant. Either intentional directedness is suspended, or the very polarity of act and objects become porous. As it is remarkably formulated by Errol Coppelt in Mindfulness Phenomenological Reflections of a Buddhist Practitioner, I quote, "Mindfulness is the practice of tuning out of our possibilities or projects and tuning into the intrinsic features and intelligibility of the phenomenon itself," end of quote. Interestingly enough, it is the very move of the phenomenological reduction in its process of turning away from the absorption into objects and its turning back to the lived experience itself. This is also what is at stake in the genetic move of phenomenology, which focuses on the emerging process of the lived experience itself and contributes to make porous the distinction between the subject and the object, between the act and the noema. So in that respect, the general move in advanced Buddhist meditation leads to a gradual diminishing of the barriers between the space around me and my inner space. So I will go now to the last point, which I entitled From the Tonglen Lojong Intersubjective Opening, as included in Vipassana, to Shunyata, the radical emergence of the field of experience. The Vipassana awareness meditation lies indeed in opening up my attention to the surroundings and thus ex-centering myself, so that I do not remain only focused on my breathing and thoughts, but I welcome the space around me as being a part of the space within myself. Vipassana therefore spontaneously leads to the Tonglen Lojong practice, which consists in welcoming the other in myself as being both an other and an inner part of myself. In Tibetan, Tonglen means give welcome, and it refers to a practice of training one's mind, Lojong, meant to favor compassion. More precisely, I learn to reverse the standard egocentric logic and to open up to the other. To quote the 85-year-old Tibetan nun Pema Chodron, I quote, "With each in-breath, we take in others' pain. With each out-breath, we send them relief," end of quote. The Tibetan monk Chögyam Trungpa also describes this intersubjective compassionate practice as an equalizing process and an exchange of places between the other's suffering and myself's appeasement. The following step in the discovery of the porosity of self and other refers then to the more advanced Dzogchen practices, which directly cultivate emptiness and impermanence, in Tibetan, Shunyata. So Shunyata is the absence of substantial identity. In a positive way, it is the dynamics of experience that self-manifests itself as a succession of events pertaining to our intimate mental life within a spacious background which embraces the totality of appearances without there being any more distinction between inside and outside. And I would like to quote Francisco Varela's article for Phenomenology of Shunyata in this respect, the a 1997 article. So I quote, "The nature of the self is precisely its non-findability. There is nothing to grasp that would make people what they are. The usual translation of an-atman is non-self or empty of self. However, we are again too close to the original Buddhist language. For the practitioner, an-atman is experienced as super-abundant. It is a non-knowing which holds a host of surprises." End of quote. What clearly results from the exploration of the different steps of meditational experience as a practice is the following. Stone and Zahavi so much shrank the lived experience of Buddhist meditation to a mere act of paying attention that it ends up being reduced to a trickle, I would say, as we say in French, to a peau de chagrin, skin of sorrow. From what I showed above, it should be obvious that Buddhism can in no way be simply equated to paying attention. It inherently includes a spacious openness to the other, intersubjective compassion, and a radical emerging process which suspends every founding and identifying move. So to conclude, I would like to show how phenomenology needs to be thought as an experiential discipline, and that it is actually the only or the true way of bringing together Buddhism and phenomenology. From what I said, it clearly appears that only this experiential embodied first-person approach of phenomenology is able to provide a common and coherent ground between phenomenology and Buddhism. And I will quote again Francisco Varela. In late manuscripts, Husserl examines habits that correlate with the flow of consciousness and an original I, Ur-Ich. This I remains within my sphere of experience and can be examined through radicalized reduction. Husserl died as he struggled with those questions that the meditative tradition addresses. The skillful means provided by the tradition of Vajrayana, so Dakshin practices, touch precisely on the exploration of this original I, Ur-Ich. End of quote. So Husserl's Quelle, source, offers the source point of experience, an original outpouring free of any categorical framework. His late work on time consciousness thus thematizes the temporalization process as a nunc stance, that is, as a dynamics within the unmoving now. In the last chapter of the 2003 book I co-authored with Francisco Varela and Pierre Vermersch on becoming aware of pragmatics of experiencing, which offers the book offering a careful statement of the methods required to inquire into experience. So in this last chapter, Francisco Varela and I offered a careful comparative inquiry into the different progressive levels of cultivating and exploring our lived experience. This last chapter, the chapter 7, is entitled Wisdom, Traditions, and the Ways of Reduction. And it presents the different Buddhist gestures of shamatha, mindfulness, and conversely, the focused attentional attitude, vipassana awareness, and the open panoramic attentional attitude, Tonglen Lojong as an intersubjective compassion attitude, and Shunyata as the very act of epoche, that is the suspension of preconceptions and beliefs. And in this chapter, we try to show how these gestures are finely related, structurally related. So it seems obvious that Stone and Zahavi's option regarding the relation between phenomenology and Buddhism is strictly orthogonal and even contradictory with our view of phenomenology as an experiential praxis, of Buddhism as a meditational cultivation of the bodily mind, and of the relation based on the common ground of their practice. Furthermore, the authors delineate a view of phenomenology as a philosophical approach that has little to do with its experiential basis, even though it was from the start Husserl's claim and innovation to promote an approach putting the experience of the subject to the fore. Finally, they suggest a general view stressing differences and even oppositions between phenomenology and Buddhism, thus, to my view, impoverishing the other and the other, the one and the other. My view, on the contrary, means, as I try to show how relating approaches paves the way for enriching our understanding of both approaches, one through the other. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, I'll keep an eye on the questions that start to come through in the chat. I can see hands up as well, but we'll start to see if there are questions in the audience. Yeah.
Oh, it's
are you able to hear the people in the audience, Natalie?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for your talk. Coming back to the element of compassion, and really, as you said, the in-breath takes in the suffering of the other, and the out-breath sends compassion. How can you? How does that stand in terms of responsibility? Is there a self that is taking responsibility for the other in that position, or does responsibility not come into that?
Wow, this is a very nice question, a very strong one. So what I understand in your question is that you would like to link this compassionate practice with some kind of ethics, linked to responsibility, yes, which is probably something that is more developed in our Western countries that in the traditionally Buddhist ones. So I think the ethics which is at work in compassion does not directly include this concept of responsibility. It is not thematized, I would say, as such, as we do it, for example, with moral philosophies and Ricoeur or Levinas. Maybe you had that in mind, I can assume. So that would need actually to be elaborated, because and to be shown in also in differences between the kinds of ethics which are at work. And I would say the Buddhist ethics is more immanent, so is more maybe in resonance with Michel Henry's ethics of life. Michel Henry as a French philosopher. And I would say that the kind of rationalist model, which is dominant, for example, in Ricoeur's ethics, is probably not the level where the Buddhist ethics is situated. So I would make a difference here, even though it doesn't mean that there is no sense of responsibility, because if you look at her Buddhist practice and text, you see that there is a high level of responsibility for the whole, for every sentient beings and living beings. I mean, we are as humans are responsible for living beings. So we have this kind of responsibility, I would say, but it is not maybe put to the fore as it is in Ricoeur's ethics. Well, that's what I could say. But it's not my field of specialty, so I can't give you a very precise answer. I'm sorry.
Thank you. No, that's very good.
Yeah, I'm aware of 2 questions in the chat, which I will try and come to, especially Odysseus, since I feel he probably has a right of reply. But we'll start. Dermot has a question at the back.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Good to see you. I don't want to defend Dan Zahavi and Stone about the epoche, but I want to ask you what exactly the function of the mature epoche in Husserl brings to this like phenomenological psychology about the nature of attention and awareness. Because I can see, certainly for Husserl, a lot of his use of the epoche was for overcoming the fall back into naturalism and for defending a persistent transcendental stance. But I'm not sure if that's appropriate in an intercultural dialogue with Buddhist forms of attentiveness and self-awareness. So maybe you could explain a little more how you see the epoche, which I agree with you is omnipresent in Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty also. But I wonder exactly of its function as you see it. I don't see it really as related to compassion or anything like that, not in Husserl. Kind of self-responsibility that he invokes. It's about, different kind of, say, normative self.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Dermot, and hi, by the way. Well, it's a big question actually, because it involves first a kind of also a kind of evolution in phenomenology in the different. As you mentioned, the different authors. I think there is a radicalization of epoche, as you said, in Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty. And also in Michel-Henry, I would say, which tends to put to the fore the existentialist dimension of the epoche, which was not maybe the first option Husserl had actually in the Ideas 1, at least, let's say. But you may also know that we have late Husserlianas, the 42 Husserliana, the volume, the 42 volume, where Husserl develops themes which are quite in phase, I would say, or resonance with the form of ethics and existentialist move. Broaching issues like death and birth, and also ethical issues of high level ethical issues, and also exploring existentialist dimensions. And here the epoche is really, maybe easier to link or to put on the level of what is directly at work in our existentialist or experiential dimension. So there is a move, within phenomenology from Husserl to Heidegger and Merleau-Ponty, but there is also a move in Husserl himself. And I am more interested actually in this move Husserl made in the 20s and 30s, also with the generative process. And it doesn't mean that he's giving up the transcendental and rationalist view, but he's opening it up. So I would say that his understanding of epoche is also undergoing a kind of transformation. And that's the way where you can really see a structural similar properties with what the Buddhist practice is developing under the shunyata experience, where you have this radical move of suspending preconception. So that's what's the core of epoche anyway. And then you have something that goes further, and that brings about the the whole existence of the person, which is not only what we have in mind and what we think about and how we rationalize, but how we live. So that's for me the way where we don't need to distinguish so much what's intercultural. I mean, two different cultures that would not have anything to do one with the other. All the more than Buddhism is now completely immersed in our Western culture. So, so for me, the intercultural concept is also problematic. We share the same culture, actually. So we don't have to prove anything or trying to connect anything because we already share. We are already sharing the same culture. Even the concepts are different. So my challenge would be to situate myself on the practical level in order to avoid, I would say, discussions that are only conceptual and they are not fruitful in that sense because they don't touch the ground. So that would be my too long answer, sorry.
Thank you, thank you.
I want to give Odysseus a chance, and then I know there's two people in the audience, and I know that there's people in the chat as well, but I feel some sort of moral obligation to read Odysseus' question. Yeah, so it's in the chat, Natalie, if you want to be able to see it as well, but I will read it out so everyone can hear. So Odysseus writes, thanks, Natalie, for the talk. 2 points. I certainly wouldn't contrast intentionality with, for example, embodiment, intersubjectivity, passive dimensions of experience. These are all extensions of the investigation of mind and world. And 1 point on the Buddhist side, we never identified Buddhism with mindfulness. We explicitly rejected that identification. We took a very, very wide spread of use of mindfulness, a term with a broad semantic range, as bare attention, present-centered, non-judgmental awareness to experience, etc., that is often invoked in the phenomenology mindfulness comparisons. We said that this is different to most classical uses of mindfulness and certainly not representative, I suppose you mean, of the rich and varied tradition of Buddhism. We encouraged more engagement with that rich Buddhist philosophical tradition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much, Odysseus. I'm happy to meet you, by the way. Well, I agree that I contrasted a bit. I mean, I wanted to make some contrasted view. I mean, also for a kind of pedagogic purpose. So I know many other also texts of by Dan, who is of course also including these intersubjectivity and embodied dimensions. So of course. But even though I would say for the first point, I would say that that's what I said, maybe too quick, but I think there is two different moves. I mean, if you to deal with intentionality and then embodiment into subjectivity and passivity. And in your formulation, I think it's still telling of maybe the way you work, because you still say that intentionality, how do you say? Yes, there is intentionality, and then these, so embodiment, intersubjectivity, and passive dimensions are all extensions of the investigation of mind and world. And that's what I would contest, because I would say that there are not extensions to, you know, because if you formulate things like that, so you have still this move of first intentionality and then extensions. That's the way you formulated it. The very way. And I would say that's exactly not the way it works, because actually all these dimensions are cooperating together in a systemic way in what is a phenomenological experience. So I would claim a systemic, complex understanding of experience, which does not, which is not successive. I mean, you don't have intentionality and then extensions. Well, that's the way you'd said. So, well, I'm just, noting it again. But maybe we could agree on that. And the other question is about mindfulness. Well, and
yeah,
No, you say you reject the identification,
Yeah.
but actually I was focusing on the article, only on this article, where I would say still you identify mindfulness and paying attention, and you don't talk about the whole bunch of things practices I included. And also because, you know, in Shunyam Trungpa's view, especially, he has exactly the same circular understanding of shamatha. For him, shamatha is not the beginning, and then you have vipassana, and then you have tonglen, and then you have shunyata. But he thinks that when you start shamatha, you directly go to shunyata. So there is a kind of to and fro move where you're not. It's exactly the same process. You're not in a successive path, but you catch glimpses of shunyata, even though you're starting as a beginner in shamatha. So that's the way I wanted to show how it works in the practice. And you can't understand that only mentally. If you don't practice it, you don't see this circularity. I mean, you of course you can conceptualize about this circularity, but you really, when you experience the practice, then you see what it means. Otherwise, you always tend to come back to what's successive, to something that would be successive, which is quite abstract, in fact, because it doesn't work that way. So, well, I agree with you, and I don't agree. I would say both. But thank you for your questions and your remarks.
Okay, and I'm going to come back to the people in the room and just do my best to go back and forth. So, okay, yeah.
Thanks a lot for the talk. I also thanks a lot for the talk, and I also
I'm not sure I understand. I hear quite well. Maybe you can reformulate afterwards, Christos, or I don't know. So just talk, and maybe the question, because it's a bit far away from me.
We're going to get the microphone closer for you.
Is this better?
Thank you. Oh yes, very much.
Is this better? Okay, thanks a lot for the talk. And I also read your article about the shamatha and the vipassana with the discussion with Husserl's reduction. And I'm wondering how would you think? So for me, shamatha is it's mindfulness, and it brings us to a quiet, so to say, the quiet mental state. Acquire mental states through the mindfulness. And in vipassana, so the meditator try to reflect or think about what is the relationship between the experience and the self and the I. If there is a substantial self in a changing experience. So this is what in the vipassana, what the meditator in vipassana do. So the shamatha and the vipassana, they are together in the process. And I wondering, how do you think maybe we can put Husserl's analysis of experience after reduction, and Husserl's analysis of experience, maybe it can belong to the stage of vipassana, but not in shamatha. So am I clear?
Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I don't know, how do you think about this? Yes. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Well, I think it's a big question as well. What I would say, that's just to be short, to be quick, I would say that you really need to look closer at Husserl's text, because we only have text for Husserl, so we stick to the text, to look how he formulates some very specific moves or inner processes which are at work, for example, in what he calls in German the Umkehrung des Blickes. So the fact that you're looking at things differently, and this is a move which is very structurally very close to what's going on in the shamatha practice. In Husserl's, for example, in First Philosophy, in the lectures in the 20s, or even in ISIS 1 in 1913, you have very nice descriptions of this very micro move of how I tend to spontaneously focus on what I'm doing. For example, now I'm concentrating on trying to find words for explaining this kind of process. So that's the object of what I'm doing. And we tend to be absorbed in that, and that Husserl is very finely describing this process of absorption in the activity, in the object, and how with the Umkehrung des Blickes, the idea is to move away from this absorption into the object, and to be attentive to what is going on in my in my very act of what I'm actually doing at that moment. So there is this kind of reversal, I would say, from absorption to presence, to the act of my doing, and that's exactly what's going on in shamatha when you are meditating and you are becoming attentive to your thoughts along with the breathing. And the moment where you become aware of of one thought you have is the moment where this reversal is operating. First, you were absorbed in the back and forth moving of your breathing, and at one point you identify a thought, and that thought is also something that reveals yourself. The flow of what you are doing at the moment what you are doing it. So that's the same kind. I mean, we have a structural similarity, even though the content is different. So that's for me very precious to, and it's the fact that you can see the similarity, the structural similarity, is something that generates an enrichment. And enrichment, it makes you richer, because you understand better what you are doing when practicing, and you understand better what Husserl is saying in his text. So it's a win-win, I would say, confrontation. So that's for shamatha. For vipassana, I mean, I will leave the issue now, because it would need more time to look at Husserl's text. For example, in Ding und Raum, space and thing and space. I don't remember how it's translated into English. You have this kind of opening up of the space, a bodily space around me, and how the I is included in this space and also different from this space. So you have this kind of a panoramic attention that we could rely, to this experience, which is described in also in Ideas 2, but more maybe in Ding und Raum. But that would lead a bit too far, maybe. So I will stop here. Thank you for your question.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I know there's a question that someone asked online very early, and then I'm going to come to Jim in the audience, and I don't know if we'll get much more done than that, because my tummy is rumbling, and I'm going to abuse my privilege as chair and say it's time. I'm just kind of joking. Okay, so the question from Anya, I'll read out. Thank you so much for your lucid and rigorous talk. Glad to hear that you identified and criticized the reduction of shamatha to mindfulness. There's also the decoupling from the ethical implications, as you've discussed. My question, do you see Merleau-Ponty's notion of hyper-reflection as reflecting a similar practice to shamatha vipassana?
Okay.
You
it's
can
in
see
the
it as
chat.
well,
Is
presumably,
it
if
in
you
the
like.
chat as well, so that I
Yeah.
can?
Yeah, you'd have to scroll up to 1246.
Where is it? Just to be sure, because it's a long question.
Actually, as the averages go, it's quite a short one.
Okay. So it's I need you to repeat it. I'm sorry.
So there's some congratulatory comments which I don't need to repeat. Okay, so mentioning that you identified and criticized the reduction of shamatha to mindfulness. There's also the decoupling from the ethical implications as you discussed. And then the question is whether you see Merleau-Ponty's notion of hyper-reflection as reflecting a similar practice to the shamatha vipassana.
Yeah, it's also a difficult question. Well, I will leave the ethical implications, because the question is more about Merleau-Ponty and hyper-reflection. Well, first, I think Merleau-Ponty's word is not very helpful. Personally, I think this notion of hyper-reflection is quite problematic. All the more if you look at what Merleau-Ponty actually means with that, or how he describes it in his Phenomenology of Perception. Because actually, when you look at what he says, he's talking about something that has to do with which is situated under the level of reflection. So hyper-reflection tends to mean that it would be a radical reflection. It would be something that's a radicalized reflection, whereas Merleau-Ponty is really trying to develop something that's under the level of reflection, that's immanent. So the word is a bit problematic, and all the more that he also criticizes something that would be a kind of position of the observer, the disinterested observer in Husserl, but also Merleau-Ponty criticizes this option of observation. So for me, the word is problematic. What Merleau-Ponty does actually, which is not what he says, is quite interesting. And I would say that we have some interesting hints in the Phenomenology of Perception, which might be helpful to think what's going on in this very immanent practice of shamatha and maybe vipassana. But it would need to be investigated further. And again, as I said already, with the responsibility and ethics, I didn't have a close look at Merleau-Ponty's Phenomenology of Perception under the light of shamatha vipassana. So, it's difficult to talk about something that you didn't investigate very closely. So I will stop here. Thank you very much.
Okay, and I think I'm going to give the last question to Jim. Jim, bear in mind my hunger pangs.
I hear your stomach. Can you hear me, Natalie? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Good. Thank you. And we're so sorry you can't be here, and you're present in your absence. I want to address the issue of practice. What's so interesting about the epoche is that it is an instance of philosophical practice. And this is what makes phenomenology so interesting, because it's not just conceptual. There's a practice element that the epoche introduces. And I wonder if the problem here is that, we have a tendency in European philosophy to emphasize the conceptual, and not Husserl's notion of practice that the epoche is. Whereas in Buddhism, the emphasis seems to be practice, and the conceptual comes later, right? And I'm wondering that this is exactly the point where we can really learn from the Buddhists, that they're the masters of practice, and they understand that the concepts only come with experience and practice. Whereas we tend to, despite Husserl's FOK, despite his call for us to practice phenomenology, we tend to still nonetheless reapply it as reading a text and start with the concepts instead of just the practice and the discovery aspect of phenomenology. I just would like to hear your response to that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, you go still further than myself. You're still more radical, but it's great. Yeah, of course. Maybe a mean to to make more differentiations, although I quite agree with you, would be to, for example, to distinguish between Buddhism, between Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism. Because, as you know, Zen Buddhism is exactly the radical way you just presented. Just practice. If you look at, for example, this very famous, nice book of Suzuki, Beginner's Mind, I mean, you really have to leave thoughts and concepts and books and just practice. So for Zen Buddhists, concepts and books are really enemies. So that's the radical way. And that's great to have that in mind, of course. But then when you look at Tibetan Buddhism, they have a very more moderate view because they encourage conceptualizing. And they, of course, they consider that it's important crucial to have an experience, to practice, and then to reflect on it. So that's the move. I mean, not the reverse. But still, they're very careful about the necessity of having precise words to talk about what they're living. So the descriptive inquiry is very important for Tibetan Buddhists. And that's the way, that's how, this descriptive interest is important to us, because it may fit and map, of course, with this crucial importance of description of experience in Husserl. And on the other side, if you look at the Western, if I may use that word, Western side of experience, it's very useful to look at what happened in the, how do you say, in the, I don't have the word. For example, in skepticism, in the wisdom ethics we have with Stoic philosophers and sceptic philosophers. For example, Pierre Hadot, the French philosopher Pierre Hadot, showed very well how in these very ancient view we have in ancient philosophy, the practice comes first. And it doesn't mean that you don't have any wording or expressive dimension of this practice, but you first experience, and then you reflect on it and you describe it. So I think that we have very interesting milestones, I would say, in Buddhism, with Tibetan Buddhism, in ancient philosophy, or more Western cultures, where we might find ways to show that it's not so, one-sided on each side, I would say. And so I think it's very important to cross lines to see how we can, again, enrich each other. And well, that's what I would say. Thank you very much, Jim. Okay,
I should say that there are further questions in the chat, Natalie. I would, some of them, people have gone to some effort to write substantive questions. Perhaps the best thing to do would maybe be for those individuals to email those questions to you if they want to follow up with you, because as I've mentioned a number of times now, I can hear my own stomach. It's really time for us to wrap up. So thank you for a wonderful talk. Thanks everyone in the room and online for their questions. Do we reconvene here, Christos? In 1 hour. So people who are coming back online will be online again in 1 hour. But it just remains for me to thank Natalie for a really wonderful paper.
Thank you. Thank you very much.